How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with us. And that's what the I Am Real world's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. Brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Well, welcome everybody to the first ever Chasing Giants with Don Higgins podcast, sponsored by buyafarm.com. We want to welcome the man himself, Mr. Don Higgins. He is on the other line. How's it going tonight, Don?
Good, Terry. I'm excited to get this thing rolling.
Yeah, this is a project we've been talking about. A lot of hard work's been put into it, and just super excited about the project and something different we can bring to the podcast listeners out there as it relates to chasing world-class and mature whitetail. So what was the first reason or thinking that you wanted to get involved in this, Don?
Well, you know, Terry, I've been on a lot of podcasts. Just about every hunting podcast has had me at least once. And I'm just grateful for those opportunities. Those folks have been gracious to me and allowed me to be on their podcast. But, you know, each time that I did a podcast, they would focus on one subject, like maybe hunting the rut or trail cameras or food plots or something. And I just thought that there was an opportunity here for, you know, someone that spends their entire life chasing mature bucks to put out a podcast where you just follow that person through the entire year so you know what they're doing at each step of the way. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of April or the middle of November. You know what that guy's doing to be successful chasing giant bucks. And there's no way you can get all that on just one podcast. It's almost a year-long, situation that you need to follow along. And that's what this podcast is going to be. We're going to detail what we have going on at that time of the year in order to be successful chasing mature bucks.
Yeah, I can vouch for you on one thing, and we've known each other now for, probably 15 years?
It's been exactly 15 years.
Yeah, so I honestly do not know of another person, whether personally or even as a public figure, that I can honestly say every day of the year they're doing something in order to prepare themselves or their properties or finding potential properties to hunt mature whitetail more than you. I mean, out of all these years and all the time that we've spent together, I personally don't. But you're the only one I know of that I can say every day of the year you're doing something to increase your chances at killing a world-class whitetail.
Well, it's my only hobby. I mean, I don't hunt turkeys. I don't hunt any other game. It's just, it's all big deer for me. And that's what I live for. And, you know, God put that passion in my heart a long time ago when I shot my first buck as a 16-year-old kid, which was 40 years ago this fall, ironically. But, that's what I live for. It's my heart and soul. And, other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities. And not just deer hunting, but I like to hunt the most mature and biggest bucks I can find. It's just my passion.
Yeah, and you'll be the first to stay humble about the whole thing. But I want the listeners to know who we're going to be following and kind of your history and your bio. People don't realize it, but in about 42 years of hunting, I think your top 5 bucks average almost like 195. It's just under 195, right?
Yeah,
with
it is.
2 being over 200.
Right.
Yeah, that's
and to throw in here. I mean, I don't want to interrupt, but people get the idea that I'm hunting manicured farms. I've got my own property and I've got leases, and that I don't relate to the guy that has public ground to hunt, but I want to put that to rest right out of the gate. Of my top $5, those top $5 came from 4 different properties, and 2 of those came from my own farm. The other 3 came from properties where there's not even a food plot or any type of management being done. I just went and knocked on doors and got permission. I never paid a dime, no lease fees. So 3 of my top $5 have come from those situations. And right now, as we speak, I've got trail cameras out on public ground. I'm looking for a giant on public ground. I want to, test my skills there too. Now, I'm not just going to go out stomping around public ground so I can shoot a 3-year-old. But if I can find a giant on public ground, I definitely will be out there chasing him. So I don't want to get people to get the idea that Don's just out there and I can't relate to him, because I'm telling you, what I do, anybody else could do if they had it in their heart to do so.
Well, I can. One of the cool things about this podcast and following your efforts is those three properties you were just talking about that 3 of those deer came off of. I've personally been on 2 of those, and I can tell you that I would have driven straight past that farm and never even knocked on that door. It wouldn't have even been just from the road looking at it or looking at the aerials. And I think that's what people can learn a lot from this, is just the once we get a deer past 4 years old, you taught me this a long time ago. Once a deer is over 4, he is a different animal, right?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things he wants more than anything else is freedom of human intrusion.
Right.
So that's what you got to look for.
So that's going to be a key topic as we go through this podcast. And our goal is going to be every 2 weeks on this thing, so we stay really in touch with what you're doing. But, as we spend a lot of time together during hunting season and then into trade show season, we might pop on here a little extra if we got a story to tell or anything like that. But as 25 years you've been writing in the outdoor industry with, I bet you've published over 100 magazine articles by now. And of course, a lot of people know of your 2 books that you have out. The one key thing, and there's a lot of writers out there, but the one thing that I've always kind of put a little extra credibility is the amount of time you spent planting native grasses, trees, shrubs as a conservation contractor. With these programs out there. I mean, it's hard to really tell how many trees you've planted and properties you've set up under conservation.
Yeah, actually, I had a real job out of high school, worked for 20 years there, but was always looking for a way out. And in 2002, I started my own business as a conservation contractor. I planted tree seedlings, shrubs, potted trees, native grasses on literally thousands of acres all across the Midwest. In one spring, for example, we planted over 500,000 trees, me and my crew.
Wow.
In 7 states in the Midwest.
That's insane.
So, when it comes to establishing new habitat, I would say there's probably nobody in the hunting industry that has more hands-on experience than I do.
Yeah. And I think that comes through with what to look for in a property. You've probably walked and been on more property than anybody probably in the industry, to be honest with you. Not to mention... Well,
I've been on a lot of them for sure. I mean, I don't know what everybody else has done. I know there's some very successful, consultants and such out there that have done a lot of properties as well. But I've been on my share for sure.
Right. And obviously, for people who don't know, as the majority owner and president of Real World Wildlife Products, the funny thing, since we actually started working together, the thing that always cracks me up is that people think that you or I would only use our product if there was something better. And when it comes to going after a target deer, if there was something better, both of us would be using it no matter what brand name was on it. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And, that's how Real World actually started is I just wanted the very best plots I could possibly have on my own property. And there was nothing out there, or I thought I could come up with something better than what was out there, and I actually have. It's a testing process that never ends. We've got test plots on multiple properties in multiple states every single year. And the real driving force behind that is I want to have the best habitat and food plots possible on my own land. And And real world is just kind of an offshoot of that.
Right. Well, the other thing that's going to be nice and kind of different with this podcast is I'm not saying we're never going to have a guest, because we might if something comes up and we want to talk to somebody, but for the most part, it's going to be following kind of our journey all the way through the year. And then listeners are going to be able, since we're going to do it every other week, listeners are going to be able to submit those questions on, well, why are you doing this, or what do you think on this specific to the topics that's going on year round. And that's going to be a little bit different to a lot of formats that's out there. What else does this conduit of information to a listener and give them? And, I guess in a nutshell, why are we doing this? If you want to sum it up real quick here before we move on.
Well, as I've gotten older, I get a real kick out of people telling me, I just killed the biggest buck of my life, and it's because of something I read in your article, or it's because of you visited my property on a consulting visit, and you told me where to hang my stand, and by golly, I killed the biggest buck out of my life right out of that tree you told me to put my stand in, or, I heard you at a seminar and you said this, and I went home and I killed the biggest buck of my life. And, as I get older, my own success has always been important and still is, but when you can help others be successful and reach their dreams, that's a pretty good feeling. And that's what I want to do with this podcast, is get good information out there that I know, absolutely know without a doubt in my heart that it's factual and it works. And, hopefully we'll start hearing from listeners and hearing their stories of how they killed the best buck of their life from something they heard on this podcast.
Yeah, and I think the important thing that we've talked about leading up to this is not everyone is on an equal playing field. I mean, let's face it. You're in Illinois. Even before 2012, when the first big EHD episode hit, probably arguably one of the best whitetail areas in the world, and in a state that allows you to kill 2 deer. Not to mention the agriculture and what these deer have to eat and what you can do to hold them, but also the genetic pocket that I think, really lets these deer get the potential to get really big. And if they're not, obviously pressure always puts a factor into it, but not everybody, I know for people that hunting up in the mountains of West Virginia, they just, the biggest, baddest 6-year-old mature buck might be 125 inches there. And I guess since I started hanging around you, it got to be not as much about score for me, but more about age structure. And that's really what's fascinated me about learning from you. And, by far there's people out there. I think your top 4 or 5 bucks average 194. I think my top 5 are just like right at 162. So, there's a lot of people that are more qualified than me to be on this with you, but I'm just sure happy to be on the journey with you.
Well, yeah, one thing I want to stress is that I don't look down on anyone, because there is no even playing field in the deer hunting world. No two of us, no 2 deer hunters on the planet had the same opportunities, to put bucks on the wall. So I'm not comparing myself to anyone. There's guys that got, bigger bucks than I do. There's guys that don't have the bucks I do. It really doesn't matter, because we've all had different experiences and a different playing field, so to speak. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm looking down on them whatsoever, because I'm just trying to put out information that no matter what opportunities you have, whether you're on public ground or you've got 1,000 acres in Iowa, that, the information we're putting out can be relevant and can be used wherever you're at. So I don't want this this podcast to come off like I'm the all-knowing expert looking down on others, because that's not the case at all. And one thing I want to jump to right out of the gate is why I chose you, Terry, to be the co-host, because I really didn't have to think too long and hard about it. You and I went through a situation about a year ago that was very stressful for both of us, and I got to see you, probably not in your darkest hour, but in a situation where one's integrity is tested. And and I've always trusted you, but I got to really see you at when the stress was there or when the pressure was on. And the integrity that I've seen was unquestionable, as it always has been. You become a very close friend of mine, but what I respect about you the most is you're not a bobblehead. And what I mean by that is you're not just sitting there shaking your head yes at everything that I say. You'll challenge me to become a better person and a better deer hunter. If I say something that you don't agree with or you don't understand, you're going to jump right in and say so. And that's what I want on this podcast is someone that's going to challenge me. And you also, there's diversity. You come from Kentucky. I'm in Illinois. We hunt a little bit different. So between the two of us, I think we can bring out the best of each other, and we can make this podcast better by making it such that it'll relate to more people. The choice to choose you was really very easy, and it happened very quickly, just because you stood out for those reasons.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think personally between the two of us, our circle of friends has probably become very small, even though both of us are very connected, inside and outside of the hunting industry. Me being a little bit more behind the scenes and networking and B2B, and obviously you being a writer and more of a speaker. I don't necessarily like being out front as much, but our core and the people that are in our circle keep getting smaller and smaller, I think, as we get older and we choose to trust those relationships even more. And, to be point blank, I think both of us have been taken advantage of, and our friendships and what we saw and thought and trusted, we're flat out taken advantage of in the past. And the main reason I agreed to do this is because, I'm a pretty busy dude. Your passion is to, I think I heard you say it in a video that was published on YouTube last week. Your mission, or what you feel called to do, is to save lost deer hunters through what you do, in the hunting industry. If I really have to say what my calling is, it's working with kids. And, I coach a lot of fast pitch softball. I have a full-time job, and to take time and do this is for one simple reason, and that I have seen over the last 4 years these snippets or comments where you get taken out of context, or that people bash Don Higgins, and there's always going to be haters, and I understand that. But I have seen when you've been trying to make a difference and try to help people for the good of the industry get taken out of context, or put in a position that just wasn't right, or relationships flat out were taken advantage of. If we can use this platform for people to see who Don Higgins really is, and for people to gain 10% of what you've really taught me over the years, that's why I'm doing this, because you've been nothing but an absolute mentor and great friend for me. So I'm really excited about doing this. And every 2 weeks we're going to check in, and basically let's start right now. Go into your we're what, a week away from opening week in Illinois. What are you seeing with activity, and what's going on as we get ready to kick it off here?
Well, 2019 has been a very unique year. And just to kind of set the stage for the listener, I run about 50 trail cameras on around 20 to 25 properties at any given time in about 5 or 6 counties in central Illinois. And what I'm doing is I'm following mature bar bucks as they grow up into maturity. And, I'm trying to find the biggest buck I can find to hunt. So with that many cameras over that big an area, I get a pretty decent handle on the situation, basically statewide, but across the Midwest as well. And it's kind of, funny. I'll post something about my observations, and boom, I get on social media, then I'll get all these responses, people saying, "You're right on the money, you're right on the money." And it's kind of, rewarding to hear that. But for 2019, we started off the year extremely wet. A lot of the crops in my area are at least 30 days behind what they normally would be due to late planting dates, because we was so wet in the spring. And but right after last season, I had a lot of mature bucks that had survived that I still had on trail camera, in January and February,
Right.
that I was really looking forward to this year. Getting those trail cameras back out this summer to see how those bucks had grown. Typically in a wet year, antler growth is better.
Okay.
Those plants that the bucks are browsing on, that new tender growth, which is promoted by rainfall, is loaded with nutrients. So the antler growth is usually a little better on those wetter years. But this year was so extremely wet, I wasn't sure how that was going to factor in.
Yeah, because a lot of the crops didn't even get planted.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of fields that were left fallow this year. But, the thing that when I started checking cameras, the thing that eventually it was just undeniable was how many of those bucks that I know survived last season were nowhere to be found. And I'm talking mature bucks that I get their pictures in the same place every summer.
Yeah, we're talking deer that you've seen the same pattern on for 2 to 3 years.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're just gone.
Wow.
And I can't explain it. I've never seen anything like it. Now every year, there's going to be 1 or 2 bucks that are gone. I have no explanation for what happened to them. But this year, it was like the vast majority of the bucks that I was looking for were gone. And I still can't explain it. One theory I have is that it was so wet and cool this spring that I wonder if some of those bucks didn't get pneumonia or some illness and die because, the cold weather, I've raised cattle all my life, been in the livestock industry. The cold, freezing weather is not that stressful on cattle or deer. It's that cool, wet, damp weather that's hard on them. That's what causes pneumonia.
Let's face it, God made them to be able to live outside.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the only explanation I can come up with. But those bucks are gone. So when I put that out in a rut report on social media back in mid-August, and boom, I just get bombarded once again with guys from across the Midwest saying, man, the same thing's happened to me. I was watching 2 booners and I can't find either one of them. And I know they live, survived last season and just countless, hunters with reports like that. So I'm saying 2019 is going to be a down year for trophy bucks. That doesn't mean there's not going to be any killed. There's always going to be some killed.
And that's extremely interesting to me because your prediction at the beginning of 18 was that there would be more big bucks killed in 18, and I think there were. If you sure look at what we saw on social media, there was a lot of just slammers killed last year, and you called that before we even started. So very interesting to see the other side of it.
I called that at the end of the summer, and, ironically, Luke Brewster killed the new world record within about 10 miles of one of my hunting properties.
Right.
But there was just big bucks everywhere last summer, and I was so excited because so many of them that I was watching survived the hunting season. And I thought, man, those bucks are going to be a year older this year. This ought to be a banner year, but they're nowhere to be found. Then you throw in the fact that southern Iowa is just getting devastated by EHD at the moment.
Right.
Southern Iowa is, probably the best place on earth for cranking out giant bucks. And those bucks are dying right now to EHD.
Yep.
So you throw those 2 factors in, and I just don't see 2019 as being a very good year for a lot of good or big bucks.
Yeah, and it's a delicate thing because as deer hunters, the thing that we're praying for the most is the early frost. But because these farmers got their crops in the ground so late because of how wet it was, that's the last thing they need. So
yeah, absolutely. And the standing crops is also going to make it extremely difficult. I was just thinking yesterday as I was checking some trail cameras, man, usually by early October there's a lot of crops gone in my area, and you can access stands across harvested soybean and corn fields. Well, this year those fields are still going to be standing. So if you got to walk a half a mile through standing corn, that's going to be a little more difficult than walking a half a mile across soybean stubble or taking a Quiet Cat bike or something like that to access your stands.
The interesting
that's
thing,
another factor that's against us this year.
right? The other thing is kind of playing into this, at least here in Kentucky, is the disbursement of deer in early season. Our season opens in September for archery here, and we don't drive around looking at soybean fields like you guys do when you're glassing for velvet. It's all alfalfa here because there's not big enough fields, at least in my part of Kentucky. You get out in western Kentucky and it's a little bit different where they have the big ag fields, but here you're finding pockets of 3, 4, 5, 6 acre alfalfa fields, and that's where the deer are. And what's happened here is we were lush and they got great cuts off of their alfalfa, but as soon as that third cut was made in, say, third week of August through just even a week ago, 2 weeks ago, it's been so dry that alfalfa has not bounced back. And, we're already starting to see alfalfa. Now, if we get a good rain, as good as anyone, that alfalfa will green back up until that frost. But I was just at the farm today pulling cards, and what usually keeps the deer off of my food plots is the alfalfa, and I'm not kidding, Don. I bet probably 8 inches of a 3 acre soybean field has been eaten. I mean, they've just hammered it. So very interesting with the weather. Yeah, we need rain bad in a lot of places, and feel bad for those guys in Iowa. There's EHD reports here in Kentucky. It's a little bit closer to home than what we've had before. The last couple outbreaks were down in eastern Kentucky, but there's the neighboring county to me, there's actually been reports of it. So keeping our fingers crossed, and also sensitive to the farmers because their livelihoods in those crops stand in the field too. So
right.
I think it's a good time to transition right now to our feature sponsor, who's buyafarm.com, and to talk about the property of the week. So stay tuned as Don talks about buyafarm.com's property of the week.
Buyafarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
This week, we're going to take a look at a property in White County, Illinois. This property is 400 acres. It's right along the Wabash River, and this property has a proven track record of Boone and Crockett bucks. Over the last 10 years, there's been 6 bucks taken over 170 inches, with the biggest one being 196 inches. I actually walked this property about a month ago. As these properties are featured on this podcast, I'm going to try to put boots on the ground on every property that's featured, because I don't want to mislead anyone as I promote these properties for our title sponsor. But on this property, it's currently owned by a non-resident landowner, and so I don't believe it's ever been managed to its full potential. The landowner just lives too far away. I think if someone would come in and really manage this property, they could do even better. And there should be booners on this place just about every year. You really need to go to the Buy a Farm website and take a look at the trail camera pictures and the bucks that have been killed on this property. I mean, you'll see what I mean. This property literally has the opportunity to produce booners on an annual basis. A great thing about the property is that 400 acres, and it can be bought for less than $2,000 an acre.
Wow.
If you're interested in this property, I suggest you call Wayne Keller, Buy a Farm agent. Wayne's number is 618-407-1679. You can also go to the Buy a Farm website, which is simply buyafarm.com, and find this property in White County, Illinois. Definitely look over those photos, because I'm telling you, there's some impressive bucks that's come off of this place.
Well, I've had experience hunting that Wabash River bottom in Illinois, and unfortunately, we don't have access to the farm anymore. But I want to tell you, hunting the river bottom in that area is just plain magic, because most of these farms have a lot of ag around it, so it's going to hold a lot, and they pile in there in the rut, and those big bucks will run that river bottom back and forth looking for hot does in that pre-rut. And one of my favorite areas I've ever hunted. So you said portion of this property actually is surrounded by the river, so you're probably not going to have many fence hunters either, right?
Right. The river makes kind of a big horseshoe bend, and this property sits in the middle of it. I mean, it's 400 acres, so it's a big area, but you're not going to have to worry about fence sitters on this property. And the other thing is this river bottom that it's in is just full of agriculture. So as those crops get harvested, the deer just really get pushed into this place. And if you had some food plots to keep them through the winter, I mean, you'd have access to the biggest bucks running that section of the river bottom.
That sounds fantastic. So again, if you, Wayne is the agent on that. Why don't you give that phone number one more time for everybody and get a pen out and give Wayne a call, or visit the buyafarm.com website for this property in White County, Illinois.
Yep. Wayne Keller is the agent. Wayne's number is 618-407-1679.
Sounds good. And at that price, I don't know that it's going to last very long. I've priced.
It probably won't.
I've priced
it may
property
be sold
up there
by the time this podcast goes live.
So jump on that. So we're going to transition right now with one of the questions that gets submitted by our followers, and I kind of posted on my personal Instagram page if anybody had some questions. And I got a real interesting question for you, Don. And that is, do you prefer hunting out of a tree stand or out of a box blind? Because those people that follow you know that Smokey was actually killed out of a 360 hunting blind. So that's the question for today. Do you like tree stands or do you like box blinds?
Well, you're going to think that I'm kind of wimping out on my answer here, but I like both. And it depends on the weather. Most of the time, if the weather is decent, I would much rather be sitting in a tree stand. I just like the feel of being out there in nature, not being cooped up in a blind. Now, if the weather's bad, it's really cold in the late season or raining or something like that, I definitely will take the blind any day. And those 360 blinds cannot be beat. Definitely my favorite blind out there. But most of the time, I'd rather be sitting in my lone wolf tree stand. You're just out there more with nature. You're right. You're more of a spectator. You're right there in the midst of it.
Yeah.
So I would take a stand. The other thing is stands are much easier to slip into some of the places I hunt. You can't just go knock on a door and get permission and wheel in a big hunting blind.
That's right.
But you can sure throw that lone wolf on your back and some climbing sticks and be in there and in the business in no time.
So I think it really depends on the situation. Now, I think last year you took some younger hunters with you a couple times, and obviously when we're trying to share the outdoors with either kids or new hunters, having them in a blind allows us to keep a little bit better tabs on them and help them, and especially make the right decisions and guide them a little bit. Not to mention weather, but I'm with you. When it's really, really cold, I won't lie, those blinds with maybe even a buddy heater, getting out of the wind and the rain is nice, but I like being outside and, especially the flexibility. Like last year in Illinois shotgun season, I shot a buck in the morning. I was lucky enough to shoot a 7.5-year-old and was in town with a good friend of mine, and ended up we threw some lone wolf climbers on us and actually went down on a river bottom similar to the property of the week, because we knew those bucks would be cruising up and down, and went in and did a hanging hunt with 2 lone wolf climbers and were able to sit there and be comfortable and still. And he ended up shooting a 7.5-year-old buck that went, I think, right about 173. So just we got great footage of it. So I really like the 360 blinds. I guess if I had a choice of anything on the market right now, the window systems that blind gives us is probably the best I've ever seen. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the only thing I've got on my properties. I've got 5 of those 360s here now.
Yeah.
So.
And when it comes to lone wolf, we work with lone wolf, but more importantly, we're friends with that management team of that company. And I can't speak for a group of guys with more integrity and their passion to not only build a quality product here in the United States, but provide solutions for serious deer hunters, whether they're going in on public land and doing a hanging hunt, or they're setting up a tree stand, probably more like you and I do most of the time, where it stays there all year. And that's the guys from Lone Wolf. First class organization, first class people. But, you know, as I get a little older, I get a little bit more, I don't know if it's the responsibility I have at home, but I don't take as many risks as I used to anymore. And quite honestly, if spending a little bit more money for a quality tree stand that I don't have to worry about Chinese hardware breaking, that's important both to me and my wife and my family. So Lone Wolf Tree Stand's definitely top shelf, and that's who Don and I use. So we're kind of winding down here a little bit, but before we do, let's kind of talk about overall 2019 season here. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I think you've already started the season there in Kentucky, Terry, and you've already shot a buck. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the buck you shot?
Well, yeah, Kentucky gives us a little bit, and I still say, I'm not sure if you taught me this or another buddy of mine. Killing a mature buck it's not easy, but your best chances are really early or really late. And yep. Here in Kentucky, we actually usually open up archery season the first weekend, the holiday weekend in September, but it's really the first Saturday. And this year, the first Saturday fell on the 2nd or on the 7th. So we didn't get actually to hunt the holiday weekend. So there's usually some good velvet bucks killed. We had a buck that I targeted last year, actually on September 12th, September 17th, 22nd, and 28th. I passed this deer that I called T3. His G3s were longer than his T2s, just a straight, clean 10-pointer. Passed him because at that time I believed he was just a 3-year-old and was really hoping that this frame would blow up. And when we got pictures of him this year, he might be older than 4, but I can document him to at least 4. His frame, Don, I bet he didn't grow frame-wise more than 5 inches maybe. And exact same frame. He had one shorter brow tine than the other, and then again his 3s were longer than his 2s. Had more mass this year, but just a good solid Kentucky buck. The thing that I really wanted to focus on is that this deer has eaten Maximizer complete feed from Real World since I've got pictures of him. So just to put it in perspective, this year alone in my food plots, on my Maximizer mineral stations, and at the feeder where I feed that complete feed, I have over 1,800 pictures of this deer since I could identify him in velvet just this year. And through different phases of the year, flipping your camera on video mode, or me having footage of him from last year, when he was in the food plot or when he was at the feeder at the mineral, he did not let any other deer come in. And deer, each of them have their own attitudes, and I have an up-and-comer that I actually am going to try to get my son to shoot this year. We're going to try to get him a really good deer. He'll actually score more than the deer that I just shot, but I wanted this deer taken out early because I didn't want him pushing anything else off the farm. So you and I actually talked about a strategy as the farm that I'm hunting has changed, and we put a game plan together. I asked you a couple questions, and you flat out wouldn't answer me because you said, I don't know. I've never hunted that kind of situation, and I respected that from you, but helped me kind of work through some ideas, and I shot him on the evening of September 11th. So it was the third night that I hunted for him. I saw him on the second night, but ended up taking him on the third night I hunted for him. So whereas a great hunt, the footage is really good. We're going to get somebody to produce the video, and actually the story leading up to what we did to set up to kill this deer in early season is actually more interesting than the hunt itself. So can't wait for everybody to see that. So,
well, I've seen the pictures of him. He's definitely a dandy buck.
So
one anyone should be proud of.
Yeah. So what do you got going on there? What's upcoming here as season opens up?
Well, as I've always been one to have deer hunting goals. When I started, it was any deer, and then it had to be a buck only, and then it had to be at least 8 points, and then it had to be score 125, the Pope and Young minimum, and then 140, and then I started hunting individual bucks about 15 years ago. But I really can't find a giant buck to chase this year. So I've been thinking about what kind of goal can I set, because, there's just not that one giant buck out there for me to go after. But I found several bucks that, are like in the 170 class, low 170s probably. There's a couple that may be in the mid to upper 170s, but, some of them are on properties that are going to be very, very difficult to kill. Others are going to be easier. So, to make this podcast interesting, I've been trying to think of what kind of unique goal can I set for this season, to get people interested and to follow along. And I think I've come up with something pretty unique. So my goal this year, and it's a goal that'll probably carry over into future seasons, but my goal is to kill 3 booners in one season on 3 different properties, and do it at 3 different times of the season. So I'd like to kill 1 booner early in October, 1 booner during the rut, and 1 booner during the late season. And that's going to be extremely difficult. I'm just going to tell you, the odds of me accomplishing that are pretty slim. One thing about it is, in my home state of Illinois, we're only allowed 2 bucks. So I'm going to have to go out of state to kill one of those. Well, I have a property in Ohio now. So one of those bucks will have to come from that property. And to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything close to a booner on camera on that property yet.
Let's just hope that one shows up there in Ohio, because if you're coming to Kentucky to hunt my farms, I can guarantee you I don't have a booner to chase.
Not going to happen there. Huh?
Not going to happen here.
It's a very lofty goal that's probably not going to happen, but goals shouldn't be easy. My hunting success largely is due to setting goals and sticking with them. I think I'll get this done. I know I'll get it done eventually, but whether it'll happen this year or not is probably not. It might.
Well, let me remind you though, when 2 years ago, when you were hunting Smokey and Trump, you flat out said, "I don't have a very good chance of killing Trump." And what ended up happening just the next hunt after we were taking pictures out in the middle of the field when I drove up the day after you shot Smokey. I mean, The thing about it is that it's important for people is don't adjust your goal for just the sake of filling a tag. If your goals, in my opinion, if your goal is to fill your freezer and provide meat for your family, that is excellent way to take advantage of this awesome sport that we have. But if you go into a season and you say, I want to kill, if I'm here in Kentucky, I want to kill my first Pope and Young deer, or I want to kill a 140 or a 170 or a 160, don't just settle, because what you're going to learn as you're chasing that goal is more important than making a adjustment to that goal halfway through the season for the sake of killing something. And I think that's where a lot of us need to do something that, makes it more interesting, but makes us learn. And I think that's the key, because you're constantly trying to learn. If you don't adapt and figure out a different way to hunt these critters, like my property did, my property changed when they changed the crops on it. If I wouldn't have changed my technique and stayed the same, I would have never killed that deer on September 11th. So your goals may or may not come, but I guarantee you through this process, you're going to learn more, even at your level.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, the reason that I've got to the level I'm at is, there's been a lot of years I did not tag a buck. Last year I didn't tag a buck.
That's right. Yeah.
I didn't create pressure on myself to fill tags. And I think that's a big mistake I see with a lot of young hunters is they feel like they've got to kill something. I've got to kill something. My goal is a 140-inch buck, and then boom, get towards the end of November and they stick 120-inch. Well, guess what? You didn't reach your goal, and you didn't. And that was never me, because if it took me 3 years to go without a buck to reach my goal, it took me 3 years. And I would continue with that same goal until I could readily achieve it. And then when I could readily achieve it, I moved the bar up, and it might take me another 3 or 4 years to get to where I could achieve that goal.
Right.
But if you're not pushing yourself to get better, then you're stagnant. And, I believe you're either getting better or you're getting worse. So if you keep doing the same things you've always done, you're going to keep getting the same thing you've always got.
Yeah,
if you're not happy with the bucks you've been killing, you need to change things and change how you're doing things.
I heard a guy tell me once that a mature deer will pattern you on a property before you pattern it.
No doubt about it.
And
Absolutely,
I think
no doubt.
that's a great carryover on this. If you're not constantly adapting and trying to figure out how to minimize your intrusion, pressure, and keep that deer there where he's not feeling pressure, he's going to learn before you're going to learn. So it's a constant chess match. So I don't know. I think this has been a pretty good opening week or opening episode of this as we prepare for opening weekend. You got anything to add before we sign off and close off on our first episode?
Well, just to build on what you were saying there, Terry, I agree 100%. I talk about all these bucks that I'm watching on trail cameras and such. When a buck, I really start paying attention to a buck once he has survived gun season as a 3.5-year-old. 3.5-year-olds are very vulnerable to being killed.
Yeah.
But once he's survived gun season as a 3.5, I start paying close attention. And a lot of times when he's a 4-year-old, I may not plan on hunting that deer until he's 7 or until he's 6. That's usually when I target them as 6.5-year-olds. But I start getting tree stands ready, so in some cases, 2 years in advance of ever hunting that stand.
Interesting.
Just from what I'm learning from those bucks, so that I can slip in when the time is right with the element of surprise on my side. I'm not in there right before season this time of the year getting my stands ready. My stands have been ready for a year.
Yeah.
And the day I slip into them, I haven't even been there forever. That buck doesn't even know he's being hunted.
I saw a couple pictures of on social media today, riding back from my daughter's softball game, of people out hanging stands, trimming shooting lanes, and even hanging mock scrape scents for season opening October 1st. And they might kill a deer, but most likely they're putting a lot of pressure on that hunting spot that they want to be in. So doing that early way ahead of time is a key to. It's like we said at the beginning, these critters get 4 years old, they are a different animal altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a mistake that I've made. I've been there. I used to do that. I used to go out in September and scout every free moment, hang stands, this and that. And now I stay out of the woods in September, except to check trail cameras.
So for the guys, real quick, we're getting to the end, but I want to touch on this. For these guys that are worried about EHD right now, and it's right before the season, I think curiosity can maybe hurt you more than they can help you. There's nothing that you're going to – if you have dead deer laying in the creek bottom, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it right now, right?
Absolutely.
So these people that are out walking the creek bottoms and looking and scouting, unless they completely lost everything on camera and there's 60 buzzards circling, I think the best thing you can do is stay out and not put any more pressure on there, right?
Without a doubt, what saves more deer than anything is human pressure. Guys tip the deer off before they start hunting, and that deer changes its pattern, and you're left there. You're always a step behind.
Is that why they go back and say your best chance to kill a buck is the first time you go in to hunt him?
It is.
Yeah.
Because you educate them so quick.
Right.
And that's why I try to set up. I will get into this in future podcasts, but I'm setting up my stand sites months and if not years in advance.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, I guess closing out today, try to, as much as we want to check those cameras, as much as we want to go search those creek bottoms for EHD, just remember you're right before the season starts. So minimize that amount of pressure until the condition, the winds, and the weather presents itself to where you have a shot to get close to one of these critters. And most of all, I think as people start this hunting season, set a goal and try to stick to it. whatever that goal is. And don't be ashamed at what your goal is and compare it to somebody else's, because like you said, we're no two people are on the same playing field, and we're all at different points in our career and accomplishments as far as hunting goes. So absolutely. I think that's two important things as we close off today. So anything else to add, Don?
Just a couple of quick notes. To follow this podcast, if you'll go to my Facebook page, Higgins Outdoors, every time there's a new podcast, I'm going to post it. So if you like and follow that page, you'll be able to stay up to date. And I'm also on a lot of these times when I get done with a podcast, whatever topic we covered, I'm also going to write a blog, which will be posted on that Facebook page. So today I'll be writing a blog on the 2019 buck report. What I've seen from my trail cameras, I expect it to be a down year, and I'm going to detail that on the blog. So you can follow all that on my Facebook page, Higgins Outdoors. Also, we want submitted questions. We want to know what you guys want to talk about. So you can go to my website, higginsoutdoors.com. There's a podcast page where you can fill in a submission form, submit your questions. And we're going to use them every week on the podcast.
All right. So just to follow Don, there's Facebook, Higgins Outdoors, Instagram, Higgins Outdoors, and higginsoutdoors.com. To follow me, my name is Terry Peer, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook. But most of the interactions and questions will be submitted through the Higgins Outdoors. So, again, we're going to sign off and be back to you here just probably after the season starts. And there's a good chance we're going to be sitting in the just outside the shed on Don's property doing this next one together. So, as we close off today, we want to thank the people that help us. Don and I work with some really good companies. Real World Wildlife Products, Vortex Optics, Lone Wolf Tree Stands, Matthews Archery, 360 Hunting Blinds, Quiet Cat Bike, and Reconyx Cameras. Without these guys, we would not have the advantages we have in the field. So for this week, we're going to sign off. This is Terry Peer and the man Don Higgins for Chasing Giants.